Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our YouTube channel, Wagner on Ethics. We are talking about love trauma, part two. You know already, Dr. Wagner has served as a full-time professor of philosophy and logic with the College of Human Sciences and Humanities at University of Houston Clear Lake, also professor of STEM education with the College of Education at University of Houston Clear Lake, former vice president of Association of Philosophers in Education, former executive secretary of the Philosophy of Education Society. Professor Wagner had an interested career. He is honored by the Who's Who in America, Who's Who in the World, and Who's Who in the American Education, and also an outstanding young man in America. He has written and published 11 books and over 200 articles, and still counting. Today we are continuing to explore the topics of part two. So, Dr. Wagner, we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, we're talking more about divorce in this part of the book. I'd like to ask you, when a couple starts talking about a divorce or start thinking about divorce, will they always end up in a divorce? And do you have something you can share with us about that?
I do. In our world today, because divorce is talked about so often, people too often are quick to threaten divorce toward one another when they get upset. And it's very dangerous when you put it out there, you've made it a real possibility. So if you get mad at a spouse, you probably shouldn't threaten divorce yet. Just file it away in your mind and talk with them about whatever it is that's disturbing you at the time. I think it's important for people to know that the thing that brings them together to get married to begin with involves three types of intimacy: the physical, the intellectual, and the emotional. And they worry all too much about the physical. And is someone letting himself go to pot, or if somebody has been unfaithful physically, are those grounds for divorce? Well, those certainly aren't things that are going to help the marriage. But what is far more damaging to a marriage is when one of the partners has become emotionally connected to somebody else outside the marriage. Emotional intimacy is the most potent of all intimacies, intellectual the second, and the physical the third, even though, when we're young and we're dating and so on, physical is the first thing we look at. So I'll tell you a story about people that came close to a divorce and didn't, in part because of well, the fellow who told me the story, because of a class that I taught on philosophy of sex and love that he attended. The fellow was a chaplain at a large hospital and a very good man, and he thought he no longer loved his wife. And he took my class as the last ditch effort to see if something might be said in the class that would help him save his marriage. And he came to me about 3 weeks before the class was over with, told me this story, and told me that I had saved his marriage. What had happened was, um, at the hospital where he worked at, he had gotten in a habit of running during his lunchtime hours with a nurse, and they had seen many of the same patients, and they talked about him every day. Well, remember, emotional and intellectual intimacies are the most potent ones. So he's taking these secrets of his day, these encounters with patients, the things that make his day special in ways that nobody who hasn't been there with him can tell. And so the two of them would talk about these patients and what they're going through and so on. Then when he would get home, and his wife would ask him, "Well, how was today?" And he'd say it was fine. And she'd fix dinner and they would talk about what might be on TV, but he never talked to her about his day. And that was what was really important to him. The secrets of his emotional and his intellectual life going through that day were being shared with somebody outside the marriage, not deliberately, but they were being shared with a nurse. And that's where he was banking his intimate, uh, emotional and intellectual assets. He was banking them there. That is where they grew interest in the nurse. And then when he got home, he had nothing more to invest in his wife. And so they just talked small talk, and that was it. Well, he thought he was growing out of love with his wife and thought, well, maybe they should just get divorced because there's nothing there anymore. Decided to go ahead and take the class. And she would wait for him. They were still living together, but he had told her everything. And so he said that I had said at the beginning of the class, and I did, any couple that's ever been in love and had the right stuff can always put it back together. Now, if they didn't have the right stuff, I can't do anything for you. But if they had the right stuff to begin with, it can always be put together. If somebody comes to me and says, I want to make Taylor Swift fall in love with me, I can't tell you anything about how to do that. But if you come and tell me that you and your wife were great and now something has disappeared, I might be able to help. And so what I told him to do was, number one, stop running with the nurse every day. And don't treat her like a pariah of some sort. But you can't go out to lunch with her, even if a group of people are going out to lunch. You just need to stay away because you invested too much in her already. You need to bring your stories of work at home, tell them to your wife again, and your investment in your marriage will grow. And there is another important thing you need to do. I want you, starting today, to get something to bring home and give to your wife. And every day for the next 30 days at least that you're at work, I want you to give your wife something. And he said, well, wait, I'm just a chaplain. I don't have that kind of money. And I said, when I say give your wife something, it doesn't mean that, you've got to find jewelry and things like that. I said, does she like to brush her hair? And he said, well, yeah, she does. And I said, then ask her if you can brush her hair for you, or if you can brush her hair for her. That's giving her something. I said, on another day, you might bring home a $2 flower from Circle K. You might go all out and get $12 worth of flowers at some grocery store. It doesn't have to be anything expensive. It just has to be something that says to her, I've been thinking about you. And he said, well, yeah, I think I can do that. So he came to me about a month after the semester was over with, and he wanted to thank me for their marriage now was on solid ground. And he said, how did you know you could put us back together? And I said, well, of course I didn't know that, but I was taking what you said about you guys did have the right stuff. And I was just following up on that. And he said, how did you know? He said, after about 4 or 5 days of bringing home little gifts or whatever, or combing her hair, I also massaged her feet one night. She thought that was great. He said, one night after dinner, we both just started looking at each other, and then we raced to the bedroom and renewed our marriage in a way. And he said, how did you know that giving those gifts was going to work? And I told him I was going to work on her. And I said, I wasn't working on her. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I was working on you. You had stopped giving to her. And from everything you had said, you had indicated that she hadn't stopped giving anything to you. You had stopped investing in the marriage. And so by having you give her a gift each night, I was having you invest in her again. And by having you tell her the stories of your day, I was having you invest in her. You were the one I was addressing. And he said, wow, I never thought of it that way. And I said, well, that was part of what we talked about in the course. He said, yeah, but I guess I just didn't pick it up that way at the time. So do people have to get divorced when they start bringing the word out? No, they don't. And not if they've had the right stuff. But you haven't done your marriage a lot of good anytime you ever threaten something like breaking up or divorce. That just shouldn't be spoken. Um, Figure out ways that you can give something to another, because if you're having these thoughts, chances are the other is a little bit disturbed about what's going on. Either they're pulling back or they're wondering why you're pulling back. Look for a way to give to your partner, because that's going to pull you back into that other partner. And that's the first place to start when you have been tinkering with the idea of divorce. And no, not every marriage where divorce has been crossing the mind of one or the other partners has to end in divorce. And so I think that's an important thing to tell people, even though most of the day to day we're going to be talking about divorce. But it's probably good to start off and saying you don't have to wind up in divorce. You do have an option. And we've just given you an example of how you might navigate around the possibility of divorce.
Sounds pretty simple, right?
Hmm.
But it's hard work.
Yes.
Um, so, what are the divorce rates now? And are marriages more likely to last till death do us part in today's
Well, the
world?
divorce rates, people have been on bad research, had been coming forward and frightening the American public with this incredibly high rate of divorce that they said was around 50%. They were telling people this in the 1980s and the early 1990s. It never got anywhere close to 50%. And in those days. And George Gallup even went forward and ran a study, and this is in the early 90s, and it came out that, his study indicated that roughly 50% of marriages were going to end up in divorce. Well, his big competitor in the country for polling at the time was Lou Harris. And Lou Harris thought 50% is shocking. There's got to be a way of addressing this. And so Lou Harris thought to himself, well, who really cares whether or not people are getting divorced? And after thinking to himself for a while, he says, I know who it is. It's the IRS. Because when you get divorced, your tax returns are going to change and how you file taxes. Whether you file as a married couple or you file as individuals. And if you've been filing as a married couple in the past and suddenly you're individuals, that rings up on the computers. So there is an incredibly large computer bank that you can get into rather than sending out people with a board and a checklist. And that's what Harris did. And he found that the divorce rate was much lower than 50%. It was around 35%, which is pretty darn high. Probably higher than we had had before, and the direction we were going was higher and higher. Well, because we talked ourselves into divorce for so long about this 50% number, which really wasn't true when for at least the first 10 years we were talking about it at 50%, and yet it wasn't. After we get around to the 21st century, so in the past 15 or more years, it's pushing up against 50%. And that's a shame. And in fact, it's probably even 50% is somewhat misleading, because a lot of the young generation, having become terrified by the prospects of a legal commitment to one another, um, they're avoiding marriage. So they're hanging out together, they're living together. They'll say things that they think are bold and free thinking, and saying, well, we have our love. We don't need to have a sheet of paper to tell us that we're in love. Well, of course, you don't need a sheet of paper to tell you that you're in love. You're supposed to have one another. But if you're really in love, are you so afraid of that paper? Well, that paper makes it more difficult to walk away from each other, doesn't it? So don't kid yourself. When you say we can just live together, we don't need a sheet of paper. We don't need to have that kind of judge stamp on our relationship. Forever, as long as we shall be together, is good enough. Well, it's not, because it's always keeping the door open. It's really not saying, I'm committed to you in every way. Um, Married people, they get old, they get sick, they get in car accidents, they get fired from jobs. Lots of things happen to one or the other party in a marriage. And in a marriage, you've created a social institution that's never been created before. Mr. and Mrs. are now something that never existed anywhere in the world before. The other Mr. and Mrs. are their own Mr. and Mrs. Yours is your own. You create it. People typically, if they're going to have a party, they invite both, not just one of you. If they are going to send out Christmas cards, they're to the two of you, not to one of you. You see, the world sees you as having incorporated as a single entity. Now, pop psychology used to tell people that, well, one and one doesn't make two. I mean, one and one doesn't make two in a marriage. It makes 11. Two, one standing side by side. Well, that poppycock, may sound nifty keen, but the truth of the matter is, no, it's not two, one standing side by side. When you marry and not just live together, you're no longer a one and one. You are now going to be treated. One of you spends too much money on a credit card, you're both obligated to pay that off. You are a corporate entity in our world in every way possible. Socially, you get invited to things together, you get cards together, things that you spend money on, you're both responsible for covering. There's no way around it. And if you have kids, those kids have a right to expect mom and dad are there together, not mom over here and dad over there. So that I think is a good story to get started off with. If you're contemplating divorce, find a way to navigate around it. And if you can't do that, and if you wind up divorced and the rest of the stuff we'll be talking about today, hopefully will help you rebuild yourself. Because once you're divorced, there's just yourself.
Just when you were talking about that, or the earlier question, um, when you mentioned a lot of young people may say, we don't need that paper, right? A thought came in my mind. If you put it like, just as an example, when someone says, I believe in God or religion, but I don't need somebody to baptize me because I don't need to belong to one group. But that act makes you go back and think about what your commitment is to that particular
Sure.
organization, that belief, that faith system, whatever it may be. But
Exactly. When you
it,
say, I don't want to marry, I want us just to be together,
yeah.
you are saying, I don't want to risk what is involved in making this unique social entity. And even if both parties agree to that, essentially what you're saying is, I'm keeping the back door open should I ever need to take off, and that's it. And that means you're not really committed. Don't kid yourself with saying, oh, we don't need a piece of paper. The piece of paper makes documents in your soul, and I'm speaking metaphorically there about in your soul,
Mhm.
but the piece of paper documents in your soul that I want this commitment with this person and no other.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense because when if there is a couple or so-called couple saying that marriage is not important and oh, we love each other, it's just a biological need, just to satisfy that need. Because once you're done with that, hey, I'm done going to somewhere else, right?
Right.
Finding somebody else who's more exciting. Anyways, we're gonna move on to the next question.
All right.
um how should people get back on their feet after a divorce?
Well, they're going to have to deal with a lot. Um, One of the things that let's talk about two different things they're going to have to deal with. Um, One is they're going to have to go from, they're going to be lonely at first. You're in that apartment. You used to be in a house. There used to be kids around. There used to be rituals that, perhaps you all went through on certain days of the week. Maybe you watched Sunday nights, you watched Walt Disney or something. And all that's gone for a person that doesn't have the kids. They might see them every other week if there's kids involved. If there's no kids involved, there's still that social entity's been broken up. And so now they're in an apartment and they're alone. Any other person might be in a house or an apartment. and they're alone, and they feel really lonely. And one of the challenges early on is they've got to go from feeling lonely to recognizing how powerful it is to be comfortable being alone. I am okay with being alone. And the good thing about that is once I have gotten to the point where I'm okay with being alone, I now have something I might give to somebody else one day if I ever decide to create another relationship. But as long as I'm lonely, I've got nothing else to give. And if I do go out on dates or whatever, I'm going to be, like it or not, I know it's an ugly word, but I'm going to be a parasite because the lonely person is going to be taking from anybody that comes their way because they feel so lonely. So they're taking from and are giving nothing. They can't help it. So you've got to go from the point of being lonely to the point of being alone. Another thing that they have to deal with, uh, therapists that deal with divorce and all that talk about, getting back on your feet. But the language they use is almost too sterile, I think. In our the book that I did, I talk about. I couldn't help but think about Greek mythology, and there were the Furies. And the Furies of Greek mythology were essentially four witnesses, but they would look to the world of the mortal population, and they'd spot somebody like maybe Hercules or Achilles or whatever, and then they would make up spells to interfere with the poor dude's life, and you never knew what was going to happen. And so I thought, that's really more like the emotions that torment the divorced person. And so I talked about there being four furies, four of these witches, not just grief. Grief misses the point, I think, if it's just grief, like, oh, well, you're sad because of course you're sad because you got divorced. But that doesn't explain this feeling like your destiny has been taken away from you, and you don't know if you'll ever be able to recover it again. So uh, the uh, the witches uh, that that I think exists are one, guilt. No matter who initiated the divorce, there's going to be guilt involved. Even if you divorce another person because the person was a drug user or a gambler or an alcoholic, even after a divorce, and this person was really wrecking the life of your home. Nobody holds anything against you for divorcing the other person. The situation was so bad, but still you can't help but feel guilt. Why couldn't you help that person get back on her feet? Well, that was their responsibility. Well, yeah, it was kind of, but after all, you married. So it was kind of your responsibility to do what you can to help. Did you do enough? You'll never get an answer to that. So whichever party you were in a divorce, you're going to feel guilt. The other party cheated on you and you got dumped. How could you feel guilt? You will in that loneliness period, and you'll be thinking to yourself, what could I have done? What should I have done? You'll feel guilt. Guilt's one of the witches. She's going to come in to mess with your destiny. Another one of the furies is uh, hate. You're going to hate the person that divorced you. What the heck? I'm a perfectly decent person, and this person divorced me. I, I'm in fact, I'm even better than that person that divorced me. I can't believe that happened. This is horrible. Why would anybody, hate me? And we were in love once, and so hate's another one of the furies. Remember, the furies just stay around that pot and are always scheming to come up with how they can mess with you. A third of the fury, the third one of the furies is anger. You can't help but be mad at somebody you get divorced from, no matter who initiated a divorce. Your married life, your combined life, that social entity has just been torn apart. Of course, you're going to be angry. And angry can be very self destructive. Each one of the furies can be very self destructive, and they're going to come for you. You can't duck them, they're going to come for you. Another one of the furies is fear. will there ever be another one for me? And people are going to feel that because, particularly in that stage of being lonely, fear, and the furies are going to come for you. Jealousy. What if that other person that had been mine? We were the two of us were one, but now that other person is. I think they're going out on dates with others. Well, of course they are. What do you think's going to happen when you get divorced? And of course, you have a dissolution of married of erotic love. And then the last one is grief. I mean, you will feel grief. It's, I've lost all this. I can't believe I've lost all this. So we've got six furies, and they don't come at you. There's no stage theory. People, I used to teach medical ethics at a medical school more than 40 years ago. And when there was a sociologist by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she talked about stage theory of grief, when a partner has died or whatever. And people oftentimes borrowed Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's ideas of a stage theory of grief following death and tried to superimpose it upon the experience of being divorced. But in being divorced, the other person hasn't died. It's not the same sort of thing. You can't superimpose the experience of death on the experience as though it's the same, as though it and death are the same thing. They're not. In death, the other person is gone. So there are no stages that you necessarily go through in divorce. It's not as though the furies line up and they come at you one at a time. So, maybe this week you get grief, and then the next week you go through fear, and, finally you work your way through all 5 or 6 stages. It's not like that at all. Sometimes they'll come in pairs. So grief and fear might both hit you at the same time, making you dizzy, thinking, how am I going to get through this? Sometimes it may be all the furies hit you at once, and they're tearing at you from every which way. It's a difficult experience. And there's no way of predicting which of the furies is going to come after you. Remember, their whole, in Greek mythology, their whole point is to disturb your destiny. And that's what the furies that I'm using metaphorically here, that's what the furies intend to do with the divorcee. They're going to interfere with your destiny. And you have to know they're going to come and prepare for it. It won't be in stages. Prepare for it and fight back. Don't let them have their way with you. You reach out and take hold of your destiny, put one foot in front of the other, and you're 1 foot ahead of them.
So who should someone who's getting a divorce rely upon to get away from the furies?
Um, I have a tendency to think, well, most of the medical profession does too, that exercise cures or helps to cure almost everything. And, particularly people in their 20s and 30s, if they're getting divorced, 40s, go run, or, get yourself a bicycle and just pedal all over the place. And when I say run, I mean do some serious running, 5, 6 miles a day. You're exhausted. And that takes away a lot of the heat of the furies tampering with your emotions. Um, it also makes you thinner, and it makes you healthier. And we know that it literally puts endorphins into work in your mind, um, just as if you were to get a big hug from somebody.
So how should people getting divorced or couple getting divorced deal with um, deal with each other through the process to the courts?
That is really, really important. Not to say anything offensive about divorce lawyers at all, but they are paid by the hour. So one of the things that anyone getting divorced should think about right off the bat is my lawyer and the other person's lawyer make more money the longer the divorce drags out The more quickly and expeditiously a divorce is brought to an end, with the less pain and agony and the less paper filed in the courts, the lawyer makes less money. So, one of the first things that anybody getting divorced, if it's at the point where we're going to get divorced, we're going to the courts, it is over. You should keep in mind there's a natural tendency for people to optimize their income. The lawyer makes more money the longer your divorce takes. He gets less money the quicker the two of you decide, okay, we're splitting up this way, that way, just whatever we do. Second thing, when you're looking for a lawyer, find a lawyer that you feel comfortable that you can trust. For one obvious reason, you don't want them spending, generating hours that you have to pay for. But also another thing that you want in a lawyer, we talked about one of the furies is they're going to attack you, and it's called guilt. So if you got a lawyer who said, yeah, they call me Blackbeard the lawyer, and he's a pirate, and that guy or that woman really does harm to your ex-spouse, you may feel giddy about it at first, but you're going to have moments where that fury comes in and says, you're a rat. You're letting that nasty lawyer of yours ruin the life of the person that had been your spouse. Why would you do that? I know you're hurt. I know you're hurt. But you can't cut loose a bulldog like that on somebody that you had been living with the intent of living together forever. Don't get that. You don't want the bulldog for a lawyer. And of course, you don't want a pussycat for a lawyer either. You want a person that you think is trustworthy. And so when you're looking for that lawyer, if you're asking other people for advice, don't ask them about how tough the lawyer is. Ask them how trustworthy is the lawyer. And find out from a number of different people, how trustworthy is the lawyer? And then when you go to the lawyer, you say, I don't want to be taken advantage of, obviously, as we go through this process. But I don't want to take advantage of the other person either. Let's just do what's right as soon and as quick as we can. Sign the papers, and it will be done. No fighting over anything. I've heard of stories of people that they had things divided up. Maybe they were really wealthy people, and so you take the Mercedes Benz, and the other one you take the Lexus, and they've got this wonderful house and a pool in the back, and everything is divided up. And it's like, wait a minute, who gets the cat? All of a sudden, everything comes unraveled because we're fighting over a cat. One of you can get a new kitten if you want. I mean, you don't have to fight over the cat. So get a lawyer who you trust, who understands you, who knows how to stand firm, but isn't out there to show you how much they can gouge the other person for money or time seeing the children, if there's children involved, and isn't going to. One of the ways that divorce lawyers inflame their clients is to say something about, yeah, I met with that first time we met with your husband and his lawyer, or your wife and her lawyer. Oh man, I can see why you wanted to get away from that person. And that lawyer she's got, he is going to, they're going to take advantage of you. Well, I thought you were going to protect me. You said, take it easy. I'm going to protect you as much as I can, but well, wait a minute, they're not going to do that. And so the lawyer fires up his client to want to go into battle, and then the lawyer gets paid more.
So, in indirectly, we can say the lawyer is one of the furies too, one of the witches.
Yeah, the
So,
Furies see their best interest is controlling your destiny. And so they're watching us all the time to reach in and grab a person and change their destiny. The guilt, grief, fear, whatever it might be, in that list of the Furies, the witches.
but on a serious note, jokes apart, um, I remember one of my former supervisors mentioned that he filed for divorce, and He said, "Oh, it's a mutual understanding. We're still friends, and I still pay her bills, and I do this and I do that." But they were separated for a year before the divorce was granted. So in my mind, I'm like, that doesn't make you think that the American law allows you to stay separate and go over this. Do you really want this? Right? And you think it's that easy? That, oh, it's a mutual understanding. We
Well,
just are
the
not in the
situation,
same place anymore.
yeah, the situation you described, um, I don't believe I've ever truly seen that. And so I've heard people say that, like, oh, we
Yeah.
get along fine, and I've been paying for her, blah, 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 maybe her rent, or I've been paying her car payments or whatever for a year. And we said we're still going to have. That's just a story of someone who's letting himself be taken advantage of.
He's
He's
an
talking.
idiot.
Yeah, that's right. I wasn't going to say that, but he's just letting himself be taken advantage of. And so essentially, the spouse that he's being divorced from has the Furies on the spouse's side. And one of the things that they're doing together is picking your pocket. Stand up, and we're going to get this done. And you get it done. You're not a better person because you have continued to have this faux relationship with somebody that you and the other person have said, we are through, and we're both committed to the idea that we're through. To continue this bleeding of the situation not only is irrational, but it's also psychologically painful to the people when they look back and they see what they allowed to themselves to do to themselves, years ahead. One of the other things that, and I don't know if you're going to ask this or not, but I'll just kind of jump in there. If someone divorces you, so you're the one going, oh, I'm taking the hit. We get divorced, but the other person, had initiated the whole thing. The other person, was the one that drove it all through, and you acquiesce because what are you going to do? You can't make someone stay married to you. One of the things you need to do so you can get the Furies off your back and so you can take control of your life again, you need to write a letter. You need to write a letter to the very person you probably hate the most on the planet right now, the person who has hurt you more than anybody else, the person who uh, uh, ambushed you, whatever. You need to write a letter to that person. And here's what is going to be in that letter. You are going to forgive that person for everything that you think they did that wronged you. Now, people may say, well, why would I do that? This person really did wrong me. I mean, I'm not just making it up. It's not like I just have a chip on my shoulder because my feelings are hurt. This person did this, this, and this. These are rotten things that this person did. Why would I write that letter? Well, because of this. It's the way you get your freedom back. As long as you labor under the thoughts of what that person did to you, they've still got control of your life, and you're still a victim. Think back in feudal days. King may have been nasty to his serfs. And if the serf said to the king, but I forgive you, it wouldn't have meant anything, right? You're a serf. I'm the king. But for the king to say to a serf, I forgive you, that's the person in the position of the throne, the high and mighty, saying, even to the lowliest, I forgive you. So, why are you writing that letter? You're writing that letter because when you do, you become the monarch, no matter what the other person did to you, by forgiving them in detail of everything that they did. You're not asking them to come back into your life. If they were really a bad person, don't do that. But you forgive them about everything that they did and you detail it all. And you're not detailing it for them, you're detailing it for yourself because this is telling you, I'm the monarch. I'm the one in position to forgive. I was the one wronged, and I'm the one in position to forgive. I'm not a serf. That other person isn't somebody that I have to get any kind of approval from. By writing that letter, I'm essentially um, giving uh, a uh, not a pass. I'm essentially
Like
giving the.
like a proper closure.
I'm well, yeah, I'm giving him closure, but divorce takes care of that. But I'm also I'm waving them goodbye and good luck. And that is one of the freest things a person can ever do. And if you talk to people who are going through divorce, you'll find a number of them. When they're not ready to write that letter, they're far from being over the divorce yet. You can't push it. Um, but they also need to know until you're ready to write that letter, the Furies are going to be with you. Until you're ready to write that letter, that other person still has control over a piece of your life, no matter what you do. Until you write that letter,
Yeah.
you
So
haven't you haven't freed yourself.
yeah. So that means you're not really truly divorced because you're still with them emotionally.
Well, you're divorced, but since you can't write the letter, you're crippled. And the other person, there's something that sociologists used to call positive deference and negative deference. Positive deference means that you're getting good vibes from the person because you're the one on top, and the person
Mhm.
who is suffering under you is getting negative deference because they're having to deal with your mandates. Well, when you write the letter, you're on top. You did this, I forgive you. You did this, I forgive you. You did this, I forgive you. Get through the whole thing, and now I wish you the best. Goodbye.
So how should one get back after all that? How should one get back into the dating world? And how long after divorce should they begin that?
Take your time. Some people go rushing back into the dating world thinking that that'll fix them right up and that people will be looking for them. The rate of second divorces is surprisingly high. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you look at those second divorces, more often than not, it's because they remarried relatively quickly after their previous divorce. You need to, I talked before about the difference between loneliness and aloneness. You're going to feel lonely. That's part of the package, and that's okay. But you have to go from feeling loneliness to enjoying being alone so you can then take a complete person out into the dating world and socialize
Mm-hmm.
with others. If you're still lonely, you're suffering from loneliness, and you go into the dating world, you're you're a sheep in wolves territory. Um, you're just not ready for this.
So I guess we see that in action in these Hollywood marriages and divorces because it happens one, two, three, four, and it just like okay, how long does it take you to find true love? Or
Well, yeah, and you hear on the on television, ET tonight or whatever, so and so got divorced from so and so, and 2 months later
yeah,
you hear who they're dating next. They're not ready to date anybody next. You've got to go. You got to get to a place where you're okay. You're really okay with being alone. And then when you're really okay with being alone, and the Furies have given up on you, standing alone, and you've been proud and you've been able to handle them, now and not before, you're ready to go out and date and socialize. And don't rush anything. Um, and that's also a big mistake, because we put so much emphasis on the physical. Don't rush into physical relationships. Take your time, because rushing into a physical relationship can compromise your ability to see clearly. And so, you didn't realize that you were so desperate. But after you've gotten involved in a physical relationship, finally, after however long it's been since your divorce, days, weeks, months, years, whatever it's been. Um, you're liable to be clingy. You're liable to be dependent on a relationship because it's been so long, and you just can't see straight. Um, take your time. Take your time. There's plenty of the physical stuff that you'll be able to enjoy. You don't need to rush into it, and it does tend to distract you from the kind of thing you should be looking for. I mean, for God's sakes, person, you have already gotten divorced once, no matter whose fault it was.
Mhm.
You don't want to do that again. And I'll bet you that in that relationship you had before, that relationship that's now your past marriage, there was plenty of sex and romance in it, but it
Mhm.
didn't guarantee you an unending life of future goodness, did it? Take your time, learn from the past. Remember, you were the monarch who forgave that person who did badly toward you. You are the one who was able to banish the furies from your life, and you know how bitter they can be, but you took care of that. Now, as captain of your own ship, as it were, you're sailing with only those you allow on board.
Wow. And Dr. Wagner, like if it's just physical, then there's lot of avenues to get that satisfaction, right? But from beginning of, I guess, since the society started uh becoming a society, I'm lacking the words, but marriage is given so much importance. So it is, you are 110 and 150% right. It just cannot be physical. Physical is part of it, but it's much more deeper.
It is so little a part of it that it's amazing. A married couple can be married, and things are going okay, but one of the spouses on a sales trip winds up two ships passing in the night and they have an affair overnight with somebody while they're on a sales trip. They feel guilty about it and all that. Maybe even did it with the same person several months at different uh, trips that they went on or whatever, and that's going to hurt the marriage. But somehow either the other person finds out or the two of them start talking to each other about what has happened, and they go, "Oh, I don't want this marriage to end," or whatever, and they can go to a therapist, and therapists can be pretty successful in helping people together put back intact a marriage that suffered a physical dalliance by one of them. So that gives you an idea how even the physical dalliance that we worry about so much, the therapist can put that together. But if one of the people had been investing those stories of their day, had been sharing the stories of how they see life with one another, what scares them, what gives them joy, what adventures they treasure, and they're sharing that with somebody else, it's not often a therapist can put that back together. And it's kind of interesting that women are more likely to invest emotional and intellectual intimacy outside of the marriage than as a man. And one of the things that causes is that it's more difficult to bring them back together because her investment's much more serious than the guy who dallied on a couple of sales trips.
Mm. But um uh in that matter, hats off to the women and men whose spouses are serving in the military. They wait and wait and wait for them, and hats off to them for holding on to their marriages. Hats off to them for putting that faith in their loved one, and then once they come back, living happily ever after. I know so many military couples, either they both were serving, but in two different areas, and then they barely got to see each other. But then once they were done with their service, they came back and lived happily ever after.
Oh, sure. There's no reason why they couldn't. As long the intimacies are in order. Emotional intimacy is the most powerful one of all. If you're still saying I love you to whoever is overseas or whoever is someplace, if you're still saying I love you, and you're not just saying it automatically like I love you too, bye, but you're saying I do, I really love you. That's powerful, and that will keep you together. If you're sharing ideas about some kind of intellectual matter, that's one of the reasons why um, brand new doctors or nurses fall in love with a more senior doctor, or a junior law partner falls in love with a more senior law partner, and all that. Intellectual intimacy. They're talking about things that they both admire, and they both are involved in trying to figure out different things in their professions. And the more experienced one is going to be better at it than the younger one typically. But the younger one can sometimes be quite clever, and that's charming to the older one. And that too can wreck a marriage beyond repair. But the dalliance on a weekend, or because you're in different parts of the country, it was people got lonely, they got frail, they were weak. They shouldn't have been any of those things, and they will feel guilt about it. But that can be repaired. That can be repaired. The other intimacies are too powerful. If you become emotionally intertwined with another person, you've pretty much deep sixed your own marriage. That chaplain that came to me was very close to that point. I was just surprised that he came in when he did, and also the fact that he was a chaplain and that he was taking the course because he wanted to save his marriage, and he had told his wife about the nurse. So he was kind of a different case. So even though he had gotten both emotionally and intellectually involved with the nurse. Oh, and he had not so much as kissed the nurse, by the way. So they hadn't had any physical relations, but they had told each other that they loved each other. So they had gotten that emotional intimacy, and they had gotten the intellectual intimacy with their talking during their daily runs. They were so lucky that his marriage didn't fall apart, because they really pushed it to the limit. But so
But it takes a lot for a person to admit that I did this. Now I got to fix it,
yeah.
right? Um, wow. As always, I enjoy these deep conversations with you. I learned so much from you, Dr. Wagner. Um, Last question.
Okay.
There is a life after divorce, obviously.
Yes.
And you have written in the second book that's titled Beyond Love Trauma. Would you kindly be willing to talk a little about that?
Well, in the Beyond Love Trauma, I interviewed people from Boston to San Antonio to San Francisco to Chicago to New Orleans, about dating, and these were pretty much middle-aged people. So you're talking about people say from 25 to 55, and I really learned a lot, and it was a lot of fun. Um, I also learned how to get more information, honest information, out of people than just say, for example, what would you like in a fellow one day if you were ever to come across somebody again? And the women might describe somebody that every person comes out sounding somehow like who is it, George Clooney or whatever, you know. So this bright, intelligent guy that all the women can look at and go, oh, that's what I want. And it's like, no, 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 stop. Let's try this. You're at your 10th high school reunion or your 25th high school reunion. You've had more than a few drinks. And now you're in a hotel room with, 5 or 6 of your favorite girlfriends. And you guys are all giggling, and you're saying, what would be the perfect guy for you? And chances are they're going to tell different stories. And that's what I learned. That when I gave them that kind of a scenario and they would think about it for a while, the things that they would tell me were so different than George Clooney every time. To give you just one example, there was a woman who had a big mansion in one of the big cities of the country. And her husband had, more money than King Midas. So, she recovered a lot, but she was also a professional herself. Of all things, she was a psychiatrist. And so she's making a good buck. And when I gave her that scenario, what she came up with is one of the things that she thought that she, one thing that I always wanted in a guy, I wanted a guy who had calluses on his hands. And I know that sounds odd because I've never dated anybody that had calluses on their hands, but I always thought that was just so manly. And she'd say, we had people to work around, the house that we have, which was a mansion. And so, I'd see those guys out there working and, um, I just thought, we talk about them being salt of the earth or whatever. And she said, I always used to kind of romanticize about that. I never dated anybody like that, but I did think about that. So it's interesting when people really stop thinking that whatever is the mate for them is supposed to be the mate that everyone would go, oh, wow. But instead of really thinking about what would be the perfect mate for me, their vision becomes clearer and their vision becomes uniquely particular to them.
Mhm.
There's
Wow.
a couple of things out of the book that I wanted to share with you because
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff in the book, and this is going back to love trauma, the divorce thing. Um, but so here's one that's really quick. There's just four things to say lessons we learned by the recently divorced. Number one, use your alone time to learn about
Mhm.
yourself. Number two, avoid codependent romances. You were particularly vulnerable to these shortly after you or the other's divorce. Number three, be cautious of romances with people who are intensely lonely. So if you come across another divorcee who is still in that stage of being lonely, they will cling to you right away and they'll think you're the best thing in the world. But you don't want somebody who is still wounded. You want somebody who's
Mhm.
healed. And then number four, seek others who, like yourself, have found fulfillment while alone. So going from loneliness to being alone. Um, and then one other thing I wanted to share with you as far as divorce goes, one of the things that people do that gets them in trouble is they panic and they try to socialize before they're ready. They send off signals that they probably shouldn't send off to other people. So, number one, and just in general, try not to use alcohol or any addictive drug for at least a year after a divorce or for as long as you remain haunted by any of the furies. You are especially vulnerable to addictive behavior, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or even eating. If you want an addiction, the addiction should be something like running. You are especially vulnerable to addictive behavior at this stage in your life, so exercise extreme caution. Number two, commit yourself to your job and work hard at it. This is a great way to take your mind off unpleasant divorce related thoughts. Hard work will also help your sense of achievement. Do not work excessively long hours. Do not work so hard you have no energy left for other activities, however. Number three, do not stay home night after night. Do go out with people at least 2 nights a week. Better yet, engage in some social activity with a member of the opposite sex at least once a week. Your first few attempts at dating may feel like a job related task. That is okay. In a sense, it is a job. By forcing yourself to maintain a mixed social life, you build a sense of adventure and keep yourself open to new options. And number four, do not appear to be promiscuous. Be attentive to how you use your eyes. If you are inclined to use metaphors such as sizzling to describe your mindset, you will probably court trouble more than most people. Be conscious of your body language. Be careful about who you touch, how you touch them, and when you touch them. And be sensitive to their responses. Be discriminating with whom you flirt. You will flirt. Flirting is serious business. The more likely the person you are flirting with may see your action as issuing an invitation, the more careful you ought to be about to whom the invitation is extended in a manner in which it is likely to be regarded. Feel comfortable about friendly handshakes, pal-like punches, pats on the back, and arms. When you're with a person on a date, it's not only good politics, but also a matter of common courtesy to focus your attention on that person and not on a waiter, waitress, or some other person in the room. Not only your date, but all other observers will appreciate your sense of decorum. And then finally, three things to avoid. Avoid hugs that are too tight. Do not place your hands too close to a woman's breast or her bottom. Number two, touching breasts or hips with deliberateness against the man. Avoid long touches to the front of the man's torso. Three, avoid hand grasps of other people's legs. Simple things, but real practical. Take your time.
All right. Well, Dr. Wagner, thank you so much. And for the next book, the Beyond Love Trauma, you talked about it a little, but besides the book, I think you told me there were some special appendices in that book. Could you tell us something about what these appendices are, and when we meet next time for the next episode, when we talk about the Beyond Love Trauma?
The appendices are all about helping people build up emotional intimacies with one another, and they're all about helping people build up intellectual intimacies with one another. For example, and just one example, imagine this. Well, I've got an imagine, and then I've got an actual story to tell you. I ask you, and we just know each other professionally, but I ask you, Paul, when was the time in your life when you were most embarrassed? Now, you're not likely to tell me that, and you're certainly not going to tell a stranger that. That's a secret that you kept locked up in your head, whatever it is. We all have those things, and we lock them up in our head. But when you unlock it and you share a secret that's that deep, the time in my life the one event in my life when I was most embarrassed, I don't tell people that because it was too embarrassing. But you tell that to that other person, you are giving them an extraordinary gift.
Mhm.
And you just wouldn't give that sort of thing away. I had an occasion myself, because I've been divorced, but had an occasion myself where some people wanted me to take this young lady out, nice person. Um, and her previous husband, had divorced her because she had gotten breast cancer the second time, and she had lost both her breasts. And she had been a very pretty person. She was still pretty. But as we were out for dinner on our one and only date, she had said something to the effect of, "Did they tell you," meaning these mutual friends of ours, about my cancer? And I was like, "No, it's the first date, for God's sakes, no." And then she said, "Well, I've had breast cancer twice, and my husband stayed with me through the first cancer. When I got the cancer the second time, he said he couldn't do it, and so he left, and he gave me the house, and you know, I uh, I can't get over that." So we talked a little bit. We get in the car. I'm driving her home, and she said, "I'm really happy I could tell you that about my cancers." And I said, "Well, that's fine." And then she started crying, and she said, "I feel like I'm so defective. Nobody will ever want me." And I'm going, "My gosh, I said, well, of course, you're lovely, and people are going to want you and all that." Um, but she really went out on a limb to tell that, and she really did it too early because that was a first date. So here's somebody who is broken, and I wasn't looking to patch up a broken person. And I really felt sorry for her. In fact, when I dropped her off at her house, um, right in the vestibule of their house, they had a picture of she and some of her girlfriends when she was like 15 years younger, and she had been really attractive. But as she said, she is broken. will anybody want her? So, besides feeling that way, by telling that story, and in this case to me too early, I might have had a different reaction had we become pals and maybe a little bit more than pals. Um, but at a certain point, that was a story that would have had to have been told. But it was told at the time because she felt so broken and she was so needy. And I wanted to do what I, you know, could by being nice and so on. But that certainly wasn't going to line us up for a romantic future. I mean, it just wasn't.
Yeah, the first reaction would be sympathy.
Yeah. Well, sympathy is a good thing to have.
Mhm.
People that need sympathy. And we lie to each other when we say that we can empathize with one another. We can't empathize with one another. I even went through the Lamaze birth method for my first child. Do I know what it's like to deliver a child? No, I don't. But I did 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and I got yelled at to say, rub my back. And so I did all that. But do I know what it's like to give birth to a child? No, I was a spectator, even if I was an active spectator. So we really can't empathize with one another. And we almost abuse the specialness of one another's emotions by pretending that we can't empathize with them. Sympathy, as Paul Bloom at Yale would say, is a very important moral emotion. If that woman, for example, had told me about her situation, and if I didn't feel sympathy for her, there'd be something wrong with me. That's a horrible story that she'd been through. And so, of course, I felt sorry for her. I didn't pity her, but I certainly felt sorry for her. She, she got a bad deal. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. Two cancers, losing her husband over the second one, and that is horrible. It's nothing that I could fix, but that's truly horrible. And there'd be something wrong. Boy, if you ever come across a human being who you tell them some sad story like that and they show no sympathy, or they tell you, I know just how you feel. Oh, fooey, you don't know how I felt. You're kidding yourself. You're arrogant. Um, Sympathy, yeah, appreciate your sympathy, but you're right. If it's on a date, you're hoping that there'll be a different emotion in that. But that you got a time when you share those jewels of your privacy with another person that you're ready to begin building up a shared treasure with that perhaps may lead one day into a common future. But we'll talk about that in the other book.
So I'm a little confused about what you just said about empathy. There are genuinely women that get divorced. It may be because of domestic violence or something that the partner was horrible. Mostly women, but it could be
Mhm.
men too. Um, that it was all great, and then maybe the person had bad company and they were influenced by bad people, and they became one of them and they started doing things that's not normally their nature, and
Mhm.
that leads to a divorce. So yes, naturally the sympathy, I'm just going to say example women, the sympathy is there for women, but then I think I can empathize with them. Yes, I don't have to go through a divorce to feel somebody's pain.
My hunch is that you're we kid ourselves about whether or not we can feel somebody's
Mm,
else situation. Have you ever had a dog?
no, I have
Okay.
birds.
Okay. Well, I'm looking for some kind of simple example. People can have dogs, and they love their
Right.
dogs very much. And if somebody's dog gets hit by a car or whatever, and they die, and they're really upset, and they tell you, "Oh, Bowser and I, we were like this. I loved Bowser, and
Mhm.
Bowser loved me." And if I were to say to mine, because I've had several dogs and I love dogs, and if I were to say to that person, "I know just how you feel. I've had a dog die too," that person would feel that I was being arrogant. I can't possibly know about the relationship between she and Bowser because their relationship was so unique. I'm being arrogant saying, I know just how you feel. I can say, I felt terrible when my dog died. I'm sorry. You can say something like that, but to make the claim and pretend that you can feel just what they feel, neuroscientists can't even look at our brains and find that feeling of empathy in our brains and say, she feels just as you feel. And so if the neuroscientist who's actually looking in our brains can't find it, we can't guarantee that we feel genuine empathy either. That's why Paul Bloom at Yale said, more often than not, claims of empathy tend to misguide us. They also tend to offend because they're thinking that this incredibly bad or wonderful thing happened to them. Either way, and if somebody else says, I know just how you feel, wait a minute, this is my special feeling, whether it's really depressing or celebratory. It's my special feeling. It's not yours, you know?
Mhm. Wow. Okay. So that's something new I learned from you today. All right. Well, Dr. Wagner, our conversation on love trauma ends with this recording. We are going to continue this discussion with with the second book. Um, Anyone who's interested in getting the book or reading the book, it is available on Amazon. You may even find it for free on Kindle. So
Yeah.
please do look at the check that out and let us know if you have any
They can also
questions.
get it. They can also
Mhm.
get it through Barnes and Noble online.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's available at multiple platforms, and even the other book is there. I saw that one too, the Beyond Love Trauma.
Well, I didn't see it, but it's in here somewhere.
Yeah.
We'll show it to you next time.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.